Welcome back. My name is Christopher Bustamante, and today we'll be discussing Woodrow Wilson's 14 Points. 14 Points is a speech which was addressed to Congress by former President RIP Woodrow Wilson in January 8, 1918, in an attempt to propose a 14-point program. This was a blueprint which would promote world peace. At the time, it was around World War One. The points were eventually taken as a base of peace negotiations towards the end of World War One. Woodrow, he used his speech to address what he believed were causes for world wars in an attempt to prevent future ones. Some of them being secret societies, secret treaties, excess of armament, colonial claims, freedom of seas, etc. I'll address those later. But he also made several proposals to the public that would ensure world peace for the future. It would inspire the Allies to win and hopefully open the eyes of the Central Powers. The problem was that the 14 points was shut down before it even got a chance to come into action, initially by leaders of England and France, which scuttled over the proposed system. Wilson was dismayed after shortly realizing countries were more interested in regaining what they had lost and holding those accountable for their actions rather than ensuring world peace. Germany shortly realized that they weren't fit for the 14-point system, and although the blueprint failed, it did lead on to later creating of the League of Nations, which was denied by the Senate, resulting in the U.S. never actually join. Wilson predicted that without the participation of the U.S. in the League, there would most likely be another world war within the generation, and he was correct. The end of the war of all wars was just a pregame to the biggest war in history, World War II. Although the U.S. never participated in the League of Nations, the League of Nations did work to mitigate conflict in the 1920s and 1930s. And although they were ultimately unsuccessful in preventing World War II, it did serve as a basis for the system set in place now, known as the United Nations. Woodrow Wilson won the Peace Prize in 1919, thanks to his noble attempt to ensure world peace rather than relying on aggression, which is what it seemed like the whole rest of the other world wanted to do. The 14 points stated many things, but a quick summary sums up most of it, starting with the first point, which would be an open diplomacy with no secret treaties. This would reduce the amount of animosity, speculation. The second point would ensure freedom on the seas economically at all times, whether it was during war or during peace. The third point would be to establish equal trade conditions. The fourth point promoted a reduction in armament, which would symbolize peace. Guns down means less guns, no point of using them. The fifth point was the adjustment of colonial claims. The sixth point would be the proposal for Central Powers to exit Russia and allow it to become more independent. The seventh point would evacuate and restore Belgium, which at the time was not in good conditions. The eighth point would be the return of French territories in other regions. The ninth point would readjust Italian borders. The 10th point would provide an opportunity for self-determination to Austria-Hungary. The 11th point would redraw the border of Balkan regions, ultimately creating other countries. The 12th point would create a Turkish state with guaranteed free trade. The 13th point would create an independent Polish state. Lastly, and maybe most importantly, the 14th point would call for the creation of the League of Nations, which would ultimately fail to appeal to all countries. And ironically, the U.S. was one of those countries. Ultimately, the effect that the speech and creation of the League of Nations had was very influential for the future and necessary in maintaining or at least promoting for a future full of peace. Although Wilson's blueprint was a failure, it did pave the way for the United Nations, which is essentially the same thing as the League of Nations, but it was established after after World War II, when I guess the whole world finally realized that something had to be done. Woodrow Wilson's aspiration finally became true as the 51 countries finally committed to maintaining international peace and security in the year 1945. Crazy how it took two big world wars. But anyways, to this day, we still respect the attempt to prevent World War II, and Woodrow Wilson rightfully holds the Nobel Peace Prize for being the architect of the League of Nations. That is the end for this podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, peace.